It's a scenario sports fans have become all too familiar with: franchise relocation.
The Board of Directors of the Milwaukee Braves Incorporated voted today to request permission of the National League to transfer their franchise to Atlanta, Georgia for 1965.
With billions of dollars at stake, being the home for a professional sports team has evolved into a cutthroat urban arms race between civic municipalities.
The owners start realizing they have this monopoly power where they can play cities off of each other.
Lured by tax-subsidized stadiums and burgeoning television markets, franchise owners continue to venture into financially unproven regions in search of lucrative contracts.
Teams had an opportunity to really capitalize by signing big deals. They were not dependent upon the ticket at the gate.
As the country's marquee sport, America's pastime has set the standard for how other professional sports conduct themselves.
In the 1950s, in the four major sports, team sports, there were only 18 cities in the United States represented. Today, we're up to 43.
Yet professional sports' manifest destiny didn't start until the spring of 1953, when visionary owner Lou Perini chose to challenge a 50-year moratorium to escape his franchise's financial restraints by moving his Boston Braves to Milwaukee.
It was the first move in the history of modern baseball. It took a tremendous amount of courage.
His pioneering efforts made professional sports a Braves' new world. It's been said that baseball's modern era can be traced back to a covert meeting that took place only weeks after the 1952 season ended.
Lou Perini met that winter with members of his staff, and he said, "I'm going to move the Braves. We can't tell anybody." Even his family didn't know.
Boston Braves owner Lou Perini outlined the potentially bleak future for his ball club.
I think he felt at the time that almost anything would have been better than Boston. And they lost, I don't know, $600,000 or $700,000 in the last year they were in Boston.
The Braves had slumped following their 1948 World Series appearance, with fourth-place finishes the following 3 seasons and a disastrous 7th-place fall in 1952.
In 1952, the Braves drew 281,000 people the entire season.
And they only had 2 crowds of more than 10,000 spectators.
Relying primarily on gate receipts before the days of lucrative radio or television contracts, Perini estimated the Braves would continue to lose $1 million a year if the team stayed in Boston.
I think he saw that they couldn't compete with the Red Sox in Boston financially or on the field.
You've got Ted Williams and Dom DiMaggio and company down the street. You're fighting for attendance, and the Red Sox won out.
But leaving Boston would take an audacious act, since no major league team had been able to relocate in a half a century.
I think he had thought long and hard about it, and it was a calculated risk, but it was a risk worth taking given the financial beating that the company was taking.
Perini concluded there was only one solution to his dilemma.
The whole move of the Braves to Milwaukee was one of the best orchestrated, best kept secrets, and he didn't even tell my mother.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin had become a prosperous city in the wake of World War II, with numerous factories contributing to its blue-collar reputation.
Take the Menominee Valley, you begin with Harnischfeger and move along. You've got the Milwaukee Road Shops, you've got the Falk Gear Plant, you've got Chain Belt, International Harvester, Cutler Hammer, Keycafer. It was just lined with factories and probably tens of thousands of jobs down there, not to mention places like Harley-Davidson.
Yet the community was searching for a national identity, with aspirations of hosting a Major League Baseball franchise.
I think the idea of Milwaukee becoming a major league city had a lure across the spectrum, economically, ethnically, socially.
Baseball, and for that matter, any professional sports franchise that comes to a city instantly gives a city a big league identity.
Without a prospective tenant lined up, Milwaukee civic leaders began building a stadium in 1950 on speculation that the city was capable of attracting a major league franchise.
I mean, it was really unprecedented almost to build that kind of thing strictly with tax dollars.
It cost $5 million, a considerable sum at the time.
There were no guarantees Milwaukee would land a major league franchise after constructing their state-of-the-art stadium, but without it, the city would never be able to obtain one.
Milwaukee County took one heck of a chance. This was the only city that built a major league stadium without any promise from anybody that the team would move here.
The city was prepared to move the minor league Milwaukee Brewers from antiquated Borchert Field into County Stadium for the 1953 season. But a mere 2 weeks after the first phase of construction was completed in March, forces were in motion that would change the destiny of Milwaukee County Stadium forever.
Bill Veeck wanted to move the St. Louis Browns into this stadium.
They didn't make any money, and they didn't win much and this kind of stuff. And he made a real concentrated effort to get St. Louis, the Browns, to move here.
The St. Louis Browns were in the same situation in St. Louis that the Braves had been in Boston. They were the #2 team, had always been the #2 team, and would always be the #2 team. So they had really no future there.
As a former owner of the minor league Brewers during the early 1940s, Veeck was aware of Milwaukee's potential as a big league city.
He knew the people of Milwaukee. He had been tremendously popular in Milwaukee. And he knew that, especially if they could get a new ballpark, they could be successful.
But as owner of the minor league Milwaukee Brewers franchise, the Boston Braves' Lou Perini had exclusive territorial rights to the city under baseball's monopolistic operating agreement.
There was a lot of pressure coming out of Milwaukee to transform that city from a minor league city to a major league city.
And if the Veeck thing hadn't entered the scene, he might have waited a little longer to see how things worked. But I think that added some urgency to it.
With his hand forced, Perini blocked Veeck's attempted move and instead requested that his Braves be allowed to relocate from Boston to Milwaukee, effective immediately.
Perini made his case, and the National League voted yes, let him go, just like that.
Lou Perini was definitely very respected by the other major league owners. He had very good relationships that he had built up with people. I think it was the Cubs and the Wrigley family, which was probably the key swing vote due to their location and Wisconsin.
With baseball's owners voting unanimously to support the Braves' relocation on March 18, 1953, the major league landscape had been altered for the first time in 50 years.
Major League Baseball finally understood that it was time to move.
The move of the Boston Braves to Milwaukee was the precedent breaker.
It was the first move in the history of modern baseball. It took a tremendous amount of courage.
For 50 years, the same 16 teams had played in the same 11 cities in the major leagues. Through 2 wars, through a depression.
It really started a series of moves to other cities, particularly the western moves, which really changed the face of baseball from a kind of a Midwest and Eastern enterprise to a national enterprise.
As the Braves blazed their trail west, opening day was less than a month away, and they now faced the daunting task of selling tickets in Milwaukee without any off-season marketing or advertising. Milwaukee was about to become home to the oldest continuously operating pro sports franchise in America.
The roots of the game, the roots of Major League Baseball, are deeply sunk in Boston soil, and the Braves, first known as the Red Stockings, were the team that started it all.
The Braves started in 1871 in the National Association, and then were a charter member of the National League in 1876. And I think what they've proven from that time on is that anything is possible if you hang around long enough.
The Miracle Braves of 1914 enjoyed one of the biggest sports upsets in the first half of the 20th century, sweeping the Philadelphia Athletics to win the World Series. Following the 1914 miracle, however, the Braves' one-loss record topped 500 only 7 times through 1945.
If you look at the history of the club during the 20s and 30s, they weren't very good. They almost went out of business in the 1930s during the Depression.
The team had been basically economically deprived for a number of years, living on a shoestring.
But in 1944, a group of local businessmen looked to reinvigorate the franchise.
3 steam shovels were local contractors, Lou Perini, Guido Rugo, and Ralph Meany. They came in with an objective of turning that around and building up a championship team. They made a number of purchases, spending quite a bit of money during that era.
Their efforts resulted in the formidable pitching duo of Spahn, Sane, and Pray for Rain, falling just short of beating the Cleveland Indians in the 1948 World Series.
Shortly after their '48 championship, they made a lot of blunders, traded players away, made bad moves, and really squandered the capital that they had gained with that '48 pennant.
Perini soon bought out his partners and began rebuilding the Braves with the same approach that made his construction business immensely profitable during World War II.
I think he saw the Braves as sort of a sleeping giant in a way, with tremendous potential that just wasn't being realized.
For Perini, owning a Major League Baseball team offered several intangible benefits.
It was almost like a marketing tool for the Perini Construction Company. My dad would use the Braves to bring people from Canada, owners, people he was trying to get jobs from, to baseball games.
And allowed him to give something back to Boston.
It was Lou Perini who had been the driving force behind the formation of the Jimmy Fund.
The legacy of the Braves in Boston is the Jimmy Fund. The Jimmy Fund is this marvelous charity which is really nationally recognized.
When the Braves moved in 1953, one of the last things that Lou Perini did was meet with Tom Yawkey and said, "We're moving away. Can you please take over stewardship of the Jimmy Fund for us and make it your charity like it was our charity?" Tom Yawkey said, "Okay." And from that point on, the Jimmy Fund and the Red Sox have had a connection that lasts over 55 years.
With the crosstown Red Sox continually drawing more than 1 million fans to Fenway Park, few Bostonians seem to notice the Braves equipment truck heading west. After years of apathetic support in Boston, Lou Perini hoped to draw 1 million in attendance, but was uncertain of how his Braves would be received in the unproven Major League Baseball frontier of Wisconsin.
If one word could be used to describe the Braves' first season in Wisconsin, that word would be success. When the people of Milwaukee rolled out the red carpet to welcome the Braves, it was but a small picture of the prosperity both the team and town were to enjoy.
It was the greatest thing, really. No, we didn't expect that.
They arrived in town. They had to be bewildered by the greeting they received. 10, 12,000 people greeting them at the train station, another 60,000 greeting them in a parade. They were a full-blown cultural event.
When we saw those people, we just said, my goodness, what's going on here?
People treated them as, almost these gods who walked around, from a different universe. There really was a strong sense of identification between the fans and the players.
They made you feel like not only were you just going out there and playing a kid's game, that you were really contributing something to the city and to the state.
Fans and local businesses clamored to become a part of the big league atmosphere.
They couldn't spend a dime in this town. They couldn't buy a meal. Somebody would pay for it, or the restaurants would pay for it.
I mean, sponsors would come in and say, I want to do this, and I'll give them all the groceries. I want to do this, we'll give them milk. I want to do this, and we'll give them a dry cleaning.
They tripped over each other trying to give their product to the ball club.
As the Braves' popularity spread, fans from over a dozen states ventured to County Stadium to experience the miracle of Milwaukee firsthand.
With the parking lots at County Stadium, you'd see license plates from all over the Middle West, attracting fans into this brand new stadium with a team that really took off because of the excitement that the fans created.
It was clear that the notion of a regional market was a viable notion. So I think that Milwaukee's experience reinforced that.
The fans' season-long loyalty and enthusiasm helped the Braves finish second to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1953, but made Milwaukee second to none when it came to fulfilling attendance expectations.
The Braves drew 1.8 million fans in their first year in Milwaukee County Stadium. It was a National League record at the time. That is roughly double the population of the Milwaukee area.
The Braves enjoyed nearly $1.5 million in profits as their move proved successful beyond all expectations.
There are so many intangible benefits that you can't measure in dollars worth that go with having a big league team.
City officials estimated that the team's arrival generated nearly $5 million in new business for Milwaukee.
Certainly that spurred a lot of talk among the city leaders that, well, what else can we do to make this a destination point?
Numerous civic improvements were implemented, some necessary and some window dressing, simply because the city had become big league.
They had talked about a freeway system for some time, had not done anything with the construction of it. They started that after the Braves were here. They built a new museum over on Wells Street, and the library became just the library. There were street improvements along Wisconsin Avenue that took place in the early 50s. So the shopping district was exciting, the downtown was booming, it was the place to be.
I think the Braves coming to Milwaukee and the impact of the first year let the world know that Milwaukee was a baseball city.
Since attending a game at County Stadium required the hottest ticket in town, owner Lou Perini refused to permit any television broadcasts of Braves games, home or road, into Milwaukee territory.
In those days, attendance, fannies in the seat, if you will, were the #1 financial resource for teams.
Lou Perini didn't want to, I guess, overexpose the Milwaukee Braves. If you wanted to become part of the party, so to speak, if you wanted to be in on the biggest thing that had hit Wisconsin in so many years, and especially southeastern Wisconsin, you had to come to the games.
Fans continued to pack County Stadium, and at the end of the 1954 season, a new National League record of over 2.1 million fans witnessed the miracle of Milwaukee, proving the Braves' encore performance at the ticket turnstiles wasn't a one-year honeymoon.
So it was great. The atmosphere, you know, with the fans was great, the ball players also.
It became such a thing that when you looked in the stands, they were looking at you. It wasn't just something to do or to be seen. It was really to come there because they loved the baseball team and they loved the players.
I think one sports writer described Milwaukee County Stadium as a lunatic asylum with bases.
One of the things that happens is you're in the stadium, there are 35 or 40,000 other people from Milwaukee or greater Milwaukee sitting there with you, and the Braves get the home run, and everybody in the stadium stands up and starts screaming together. They're all experiencing their Milwaukee-ness at that moment, and they're feeling some togetherness and some cohesion. Now, I challenge you to tell me or show me another example in our society today where there's that same sense of excitement and community belonging that gets created when you're at a ball game like that.
By the summer of 1955, the Braves were the envy of all of baseball as they continued to contend for the National League pennant, shatter attendance records, and reap unprecedented profits.
The sleepy sport had a dousing of cold water thrown on its head, and any owner with an IQ over 80 noticed and said, wow, here are some opportunities.
On July 12, 1955, Milwaukee seized the opportunity to showcase its new big league image on a national stage as it hosted baseball's All-Star Game.
It was a measure of civic pride. The Braves always made you feel like Milwaukee had that extra something special, besides having a great lake and all the other things that make living in Milwaukee as good as it is. But the Milwaukee Braves were kind of like an exclamation point.
The atmosphere made an impression on the baseball elite in attendance, including Brooklyn Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley and New York Giants owner Horace Stoneham.
He attended the All-Star Game in '55 and no doubt saw the enthusiastic crowd and the tremendous amount of gains they were made in just the 3 years they were there.
Certainly O'Malley and Stoneham were awakened to the opportunities that lay ahead because of the experience that the Braves had under Perini.
Because of the Braves' immediate success in Milwaukee, cities began competing in a cutthroat game of luring baseball franchises with hopes of enjoying the same results as the miracle in Milwaukee.
What Milwaukee proved was that it was time to start prospecting. Cities were no longer just cities, you were now prospecting markets.
When Milwaukee County Stadium hosted nearly 6 million paid admissions in its first 3 seasons in a city with less than 750,000 residents, baseball's struggling franchises began re-examining their financial options.
If you're a second team in a 2-team market, if you're the St. Louis Browns or the Philadelphia Athletics, you start to look at cities no longer as cities. Cities become markets.
The immediate success of the Braves in Milwaukee became the catalyst for other franchises to relocate.
I think other owners at the time saw the move that the Braves did, and if they couldn't get whatever support they needed for their ballpark locally, there were places that would give them that support, and they sought it out and found it.
Receiving civically funded stadiums with ample parking, the Browns relocated to Baltimore's Memorial Stadium in 1954, reinventing themselves as the Orioles, and the Athletics successfully shifted from Philadelphia to Kansas City's remodeled Municipal Stadium in 1955.
All of a sudden it broke everything wide open, but Milwaukee was the start of it.
The Braves' success in Milwaukee also prompted Walter O'Malley to approach Brooklyn officials for a new stadium to keep his Dodgers competitive in baseball's new world order.
His problem was Ebbets Field was obsolete, was in not the best neighborhood.
You only had about 800 parking spots for cars at Ebbets Field.
But it was impossible to be competitive, trapped as he was in the middle of Brooklyn, when the world was changing and people were moving to the suburbs.
With the Dodgers fan base moving out of the city and into the suburbs, Walter O'Malley approached New York's Parks Commissioner Robert Moses with the hopes of condemning some downtown Brooklyn land for a new stadium.
It was really not that much of a gamble for Walter O'Malley to leverage that, saying, look at this Milwaukee example. They've got not only a parking lot that can expand, but they've also got a stadium that can expand, that was built for baseball, that is a modern stadium.
But when negotiations between the Dodgers and Brooklyn soured, O'Malley looked towards baseball's newest frontier.
If you're O'Malley, what Lou Perini showed you was if you can tap into a market, if you can find a place and you can exploit it as a market, you can do something remarkable.
They saw moving west and the hunger for Major League Baseball, not just in this one area.
Clearly, just as the country was changing with the suburbanization, automobilization of the late 40s and 1950s and the introduction of television on a mass basis throughout the society, there was a westward movement.
I think that O'Malley and a lot of other people were just licking their chops at the idea of going to Los Angeles.
With Giants owner Horace Stoneham agreeing to simultaneously move the Giants to San Francisco, Walter O'Malley received permission from baseball owners to relocate the Dodgers to Los Angeles prior to the start of the 1958 season.
O'Malley went out to Los Angeles. He brought his team out, and they gave him Chavez Ravine. They gave him all that land, built a stadium.
That was the western expansion of baseball. Lou Perini and the Milwaukee Braves absolutely should be credited with the western expansion. It's like baseball's manifest destiny.
Back in Milwaukee, County Stadium reached another astounding attendance record in 1957 as over 2.2 million fans witnessed the Braves endure a season filled with dramatic injuries, strategic trades, and heart-stopping heroics.
On base, Hank Aaron steps in against the third Cardinal pitcher of the game, Billy Muffett. Here it comes. And there it goes. Hammerin' Hank hits a home run, and this one is special. The Braves did it, clinched the pennant. They came close before, but this is it. The end of years of frustration. There's a mob scene on the field, and why not? Victory didn't come easy, and it came late, so it's extra welcome.
Milwaukee continued to enjoy the financial benefits of the Braves' success as approximately $8 million of fresh money was generated in 1957 and over $34 million since their relocation from Boston.
It'll never, ever be duplicated. I don't care where they go, what happens, how many World Series you win or whatever. That situation in Milwaukee will never, ever be duplicated.
But the Braves were still considered underdogs against their World Series foes, the New York Yankees, who were expected to win their 8th Fall Classic in 11 years.
They acted as though you weren't supposed to get them out. They were supposed to do whatever they wanted to do.
I think up to that point, I don't know if the inferiority complex would be what the term I would use, but certainly there was this idea that we're out here in the middle of the country and a lot of folks don't know about us.
When Milwaukee was sarcastically nicknamed Bushville by the Yankees, it only fueled the city's resolve as the Braves went on to win a dramatic 7-game World Series.
He steps on third and it's all over, but the tumult and the shouting. the new world's champions of baseball, the Miracle Men from Milwaukee.
As soon as that Matthews grabbed that grounder and touched third for the final out, every door in downtown business in Milwaukee opened up, and here's people coming out, and they're yelling away, and they're screaming, and that's what they all got in the middle of Main Street. You couldn't get a car through. It was just so spontaneous.
It was great. And then when we took the plane coming back home, and we saw what was happening from the airport to downtown with that many people, I never thought I could see it.
400,000 strangers spilled into the streets as horns blared and factory whistles blew.
Bushville wins. That was the headline in the Milwaukee Sentinel. And the party and the parade up and down Wisconsin Avenue really served notice that Milwaukee was a big league town.
As the home of baseball's world champions, Milwaukee was proclaimed the baseball capital of the world by Mayor Frank Zeidler, truly making it a big league city in every sense of the term.
This desire to be considered big league is the reason why so many municipalities end up spending very important public dollars to keep baseball teams and sports clubs in town.
Following the 1958 Fall Classic, America's pastime was in the throes of an economic revolution prompted by the Dodgers and Giants' exodus west. The United States Congress held hearings that year to discuss the sport's sudden carpetbagger approach. Congress took no formal action following the hearing, so disgruntled franchises continued exploring prospective markets.
By that stage of the game, anything was fair. If you could get it and get the vote, it moved any place. Good Lord, look at all the moves that have been taking place in Major League Baseball since that time. Good grief. It's shocking, frightening.
For the first time since their relocation to Milwaukee, the Braves recorded a slight but unmistakable decrease in attendance despite repeating as National League champions.
It seemed like the interest was fading. I think it was like 58 after we won in 57, and then we lost in 58, but we were right in there.
After nearly 6 years of attendance bliss, the charm of Major League Baseball was beginning to dissipate in Milwaukee. Since the Braves were no longer breaking attendance records, getting a seat at County Stadium right before game time became a fairly common practice.
The crowds weren't as extensive. Instead of going in and seeing, 35, 40,000 people, you'd see 7, 12, 15,000 people. And sometimes that included the grounds crew.
Several contributing factors slowly led to the Braves' attendance demise. Fan favorites were traded away, promotions were discontinued, and a war of epic proportions divided the ball club from its fans.
Somebody had the bright idea one day, well, why don't we get these fans to buy more stuff at the ballpark?
Milwaukee was a lunch pail town. They were used to bringing their lunch, and at the ballpark, their lunch was their cans of beer.
The early days, you could bring anything you want in the stadium, but they wanted you to buy their concessions.
One of the things that the Milwaukee County Board did that irritated the Braves fans was to ban the carry-in of 6-packs of beer. A lot of people resented the move. Milwaukee was always known as the city of breweries, and here they were banning the hometown product.
What's more important in Milwaukee than beer? It was a bad mistake by the Braves franchise to not let fans bring beer into the ballpark, and they paid the price for it.
I think it was the very next year they said, hey, we're lifting that ban, come on back. And enough people had stayed away that they said, heck with you, we're not coming in.
No longer contending for the National League pennant on an annual basis, the Braves continued to suffer from spiraling attendance figures with no bottom in sight as they drew only 1.1 million fans in 1961, less than half their watermark high from 1957.
It's like anything else. If the product deteriorates, the fans whom winning was the reason they're going to go, they started finding other things to do.
But not even the most disgruntled fan could have foreseen the Braves' bleak future in Milwaukee. By 1962, Lou Perini's vision of baseball's New World Order less than a decade earlier had revolutionized baseball's entire economic structure.
Suddenly, cities are no longer the center of the baseball economy. That to me is the beginning of modern baseball. The speed in which baseball changed was almost overnight. Within 6 years, it was obvious that everything you thought you knew about the sport was going to change.
Although critics feared the almost sacred bonds between cities and their baseball teams had been destroyed, the franchise relocations instead proved America yearned for more of its pastime.
So what Perini started was a landslide, in effect. I guess once you start moving, there was nothing to stop it.
Yet Major League Baseball refused to expand beyond its 16-team, two-league structure that had existed for over half a century.
You have the beginnings of a resentment towards Major League Baseball, that how could they do this? How can they do this to this great baseball town?
Looking to exploit baseball's growing popularity in America's untapped markets, New York attorney William Shea and former Brooklyn Dodgers executive Branch Rickey organized the rival Continental League, looking to place teams in areas without Major League Baseball.
There were other cities that started saying, look, we have just as much to offer. Why don't you expand, build some more ballparks, and we can all be successful.
You're looking at cities like Houston or Dallas or El Paso for that matter, cities like Phoenix, cities like Denver, cities that were legitimate baseball markets, legitimate Major League Baseball markets.
The Continental League put so much pressure on Major League Baseball.
Major League Baseball responded, and responded big time by expanding by 2 teams in '61 and 2 in '62. Therefore, just killed the Continental League.
The American League expanded from 8 to 10 teams in 1961 with the addition of the Los Angeles Angels and Washington Senators. And the National League followed in 1962 with the New York Metropolitans and Houston Colt 45s. Because of the new franchises, the traditional 154-game schedule was expanded to 162 games to provide baseball owners 8 additional dates to add to their ever-expanding bottom line.
Sure, it's a business. No one's kidding that. Every major league sport, football, basketball, they're all businesses. Everyone's looking for a better deal.
In the early 1960s, nearly 1,000 miles outside of Milwaukee, an enthusiastic group of businessmen and boosters were building a spirited campaign to become a big league city.
You had a very dynamic leadership emerging out of Atlanta, led by Ivan Allen, who was then the mayor. You had Mills Lane, who was a banker, a maverick banker at C&S Bank. And then you had the owner and operator of the Coca-Cola bottling company, and it was Arthur Montgomery. And those three basically formed a leadership group.
And in Atlanta's defense, they were just as hungry for a ball club as Milwaukee had been back in '53. You know, the new rising star of the South. You know, so they were really going all out, you know, to attract a major league team, and didn't really care about where it came from.
What made Atlanta so appealing was the unlimited potential of its broad geographical base.
At that time, more and more television was becoming the focal point of revenue streams. And you could see that great wide space of the South could be an unbelievable television market.
A whole untapped television market. They had no competition. They had the whole South to themselves.
Since baseball didn't and still doesn't share local television and radio broadcast revenue equally among the teams, owners were free to maximize their local profits without sharing among fellow franchises.
Teams now had an opportunity to really capitalize by signing big deals for their television rights to broadcast their games, and later on cable deals, and suddenly they were not dependent upon the ticket at the gate. That was the big change.
I think that's where baseball went from, America's game, so to speak, to this, big business.
Although selling the broadcast rights to games had yet to materialize in the billion-dollar revenue stream it's become today, it was still quickly becoming an innovative and lucrative source of income.
By today's standards, the money that owners were making beyond attendance was relatively small, but certainly they got in on the ground level When teams were doing well in the field, radio stations, television stations wanted a piece of the action.
Granting geographical territories to each team, clubs established regional dominance through elaborate broadcast networks that carried games beyond their home cities.
It's an amazing model when you think about it, to give your product for free to the fans at home. But what does that do? That builds interest, and it's more advertising than anything. And if you can make money off of advertising your product and draw more fans to your games, why wouldn't an owner do that?
By 1962, even Lou Perini had buckled to the almighty dollar and allowed 15 Braves road games to be televised.
Well, once again, it was out of fear. And you start getting to 59, 60, 61, where the Braves' attendance is dropping, and suddenly he cares about television again.
After years of refusing to televise games, fearing it would cut into ticket sales, Perini realized the hundreds of thousands of dollars the Braves received in sponsorship and advertising dollars offset the team's declining turnstile appeal.
The economy was changing, and the Braves saw a chance to get their money without having to worry how many butts there were in the seats.
With a total attendance of 766,921 fans in 1962, the Braves ranked 8th out of 10 National League clubs. After reaping $7.5 million in profits during its first 9 years in Milwaukee, Lou Perini posted his first losses in 1962.
From a standpoint of Lou Perini, he could probably see what was happening.
Renowned for his sound business approach, the only owner in Milwaukee's major league history decided to get out of the baseball business.
The Perini Corporation, which owned the Braves, went public in 1961. I believe my father was not happy, and the shareholders were not happy with him, because the first couple of years after the company went public, the company had some difficult construction projects, and the earnings weren't that good. So maybe the sale of the Braves was an opportunity to improve earnings.
On November 16, 1962, Perini sold the Milwaukee Braves to the Chicago-based LaSalle Corporation, led by 34-year-old insurance broker William Bartholomew.
We all were in other businesses, but we had a love of baseball, and we had pockets. Some of our pockets weren't quite as deep as others, but we managed to be able to finance the purchase of the Braves, which was $6.2 million was the price at the time.
The Braves' new owners had a $2 million balloon payment due in 1968 and looked to generate new revenue streams. Bartholomew and his associates offered to sell 115,000 shares of team stock at a price of $11.50 per share to Wisconsin residents prior to the start of the 1963 season.
It was our unanimous opinion that we should offer at the same price proportionately that we'd paid for the team against the $6.2 million, some local ownership.
They hoped that the invitation to purchase stock would become the stroke of genius to not only reinvigorate fan interest, but also pull the team back above the financial break-even point.
We were able to do that in a way. We had, I think, over 1,000 shareholders bought some shares. They didn't buy too many shares, but they bought some shares, and it put a nice flavor on it.
The invitation to Milwaukee buyers was widely advertised and largely ignored, and was deemed a bust after only 13,000 shares were sold.
The sale of the shares, it was a mixed bag. We thought we would sell maybe what was the equivalent of 30–40% of the team, and we didn't. It was much less than that.
After an off-season ticket sales push exposed the community's apathy towards the Braves, the rookie owners sensed they had bought into a grave situation.
The best days had gone. The salad days, the high cotton days, they were gone. Attendance had been declining in Milwaukee. The Braves became a mediocre team, and they became a team that really didn't capture the imagination of the locals anymore.
Remember Oliver Keekly, the sports editor of the Milwaukee Journal, called them the carpetbaggers from Chicago. And Milwaukee fans and Wisconsin fans really just did not trust these new owners.
It looked like they had their minds on something else rather than making our ball club as good as it could possibly be.
Seeking a quick fix instead of trying to revive Milwaukee's sagging attendance, the Braves' new ownership group began shopping for a new, hospitable venue.
The rumors started, soon after the Chicago group bought the franchise from the Perinis. They were not exactly enchanted with Milwaukee.
In 1963, Mayor Ivan Allen and a group of Atlanta officials pitched Atlanta's wonders to a group of Milwaukee's owners.
During the All-Star game in Cleveland, the Braves were approached by a group of leaders in Atlanta.
By the end of that fateful midsummer meeting, negotiations began between Atlanta and the Braves.
Major League Baseball, one way or another, was going to have a team in Atlanta.
By September, an agreement was in place to move the Braves to Atlanta for the 1965 season.
They saw a lucrative market in the South, and they took the money and they ran. And this is after they had been quoted as saying, "We're here today, we're here tomorrow, we'll be here as long as you want us." They were packing the bags at that time.
But Milwaukee was not willing to part with their big league status without a fight. While the Braves' move was still perceived as a rumor in the court of public opinion, team ownership was becoming increasingly unhappy in Milwaukee.
There wasn't enough money in Milwaukee. If you were going to compare the financial possibilities in Atlanta and Milwaukee, Atlanta would win every single time.
A failed Go to Bat for the Braves campaign couldn't boost season ticket sales in Milwaukee or secure a $500,000 deal for radio and television rights.
In 1964, Schlitz, which was a major sponsor of the Braves, could only offer a tiny percentage of what Coca-Cola could offer. Schlitz didn't make enough money to compete with a giant like Coca-Cola.
By the time baseball's elite gathered for the 1964 All-Star Game, an article in the Sporting News attributed to an unimpeachable source claimed that the Braves planned to move to Atlanta in 1965.
I think maybe the fans were more confused. The people in Milwaukee and Atlanta who was trying to put that whole deal together.
You'd have somebody who worked in the clubhouse, or somebody that you knew in the front office that said, "Hey, they're going to sell this ball club from this group in Chicago, and they're going to move to Atlanta. I think Coca-Cola's involved and stuff." And then you'd hear a contradiction to that.
Publicly, Braves officials issued a series of public denials hoping to quell the rumors.
Because they thought the more they denied it, the more people might show up at the ballpark in Milwaukee. They wanted the people to come back. "Oh, we're not going to leave you, come on." And they knew they were going to, but they wanted to get some increased gate figures, and never came to pass. Of course, everybody knew they were lying.
Privately, Bill Bartholomew lobbied the benefits of the Braves' relocation to Atlanta amongst fellow owners.
I worked with all the owners on the other teams and convinced them that this was not only the best thing for the Braves, but the best thing for the National League.
The reality, I think, was that the market possibilities in the New South were too great for the owners to pass up.
Atlanta had the potential of a California in terms of the last market that hadn't been tapped.
When Milwaukee County officials offered to renegotiate the Braves stadium lease, suggesting an annual rent of $1 up to the first million admissions, Bartholomew and the Braves ownership declined, claiming to be fully satisfied with their existing lease.
If you look at Milwaukee, what they did was they mined it until it was dry. And the interesting thing about that was there was no reason for the Braves to leave Milwaukee. It was simply that when you started to take your map of the United States out and start looking, these owners were prospectors.
Just 10 days after telling the press that it would be a personal disappointment to leave Milwaukee, Bartholomew scheduled a press conference.
The Board of Directors of the Milwaukee Braves Incorporated voted today to request permission of the National League to transfer their franchise to Atlanta, Georgia for 1965.
I wasn't too fond of it. They gave me this memo and said, "Ernie, you read this." And so I read it. The Braves today announced that they're moving their franchise to Atlanta, and I don't know if I would wanted to go home or not. Now, we got a couple of threatening calls and some notes, and "You traitor, get out of town." And I wanted to say, "Hey, it's not my team, but I was a part of it." No one liked it, but it was going to happen.
The same Braves franchise that in 1953 became the first club in 50 years to relocate was perched to become the first club to switch cities twice.
And if team ownership is constantly fighting to generate revenue, then they're going to leave. They're going to look for, as we say, greener pastures.
The financial facts just don't dictate that we can operate our kind of organization
in Milwaukee, and that's the reason we made this change. We didn't buy the club to move it, but we also didn't buy it to go broke.
Claiming that the club had lost $3.5 million in Milwaukee due in large part to the flagging attendance, the Braves owners blamed the anti-baseball climate for driving them away.
Actually, the animosity got very ugly in a war of words for a couple of years before it got down to actual political moves and legal moves.
The hostility grew so heated that the Milwaukee County Board called for a resolution to investigate management's possible contract violations in ticket sales and accused the Braves of purposely losing games.
The fallout of the sale of the team was that the county board turned against the Braves. Eugene Grubschmidt was the supervisor who pretty much epitomized the hostility that was created between the politicians and the team. The county board simply started to look at it in terms of money.
But no public bickering could compete with Atlanta's untapped revenue streams compared to Milwaukee's limited advertising market of 2.5 million television households.
You had Minnesota on one side, you had Cubs and White Sox to the south, you had the lake to the east, and you had the great North Woods to the north.
Milwaukee was declining its population and was a rust belt, losing manufacturing jobs. Atlanta was a growing metropolitan area.
Braves ownership cashed in on Major League Baseball's neglect of the South, receiving $2.5 million for their first broadcast contract in Atlanta. It covered a 7-state empire of 6 million baseball-deprived households between the Atlantic Ocean and Mississippi River.
We thought there'd be some opportunities to build a strong radio network, and radio was very important at that time. And the degree that we had telecasts available, it was an opportunity that did not exist in Milwaukee because of the proximity of Chicago and Twin Cities.
Aware that the Braves' lease with Milwaukee County Stadium didn't expire until after the 1965 season, the National League gave the franchise permission to move to Atlanta in 1966, a year later than originally requested.
At the opening of the meeting today, which I had called to consider the Milwaukee-Atlanta situation, the Milwaukee officials advised us that they learned last night, or early this morning, they learned this morning that they were under a restraining order not to make a request for the shift of franchise, for a transfer from Milwaukee to Atlanta. And out of respect for the court order, the league took no action.
Milwaukee was fighting back. What was his name? Grobschmidt. Mr. Grobschmidt was raising all manners of hell. Both sides had their dukes up, and the fight was about to begin.
That left Milwaukee with one last summer to either save their Braves franchise or prepare to become the first city to be completely abandoned by big league sports. Following the 1964 season, fans began realizing Milwaukee would not be able to match Atlanta's financial incentives and diverted their passion for the Braves into an exercise of spite.
The interesting thing was John Doyne, who was one of the county supervisors in Milwaukee, had decried Atlanta's piracy of the Braves. And if you go back and look, it was a very similar type of piracy. It was just that they were in the loser's dugout this time instead of back in '53.
As a result of their lame duck status, the Braves lost nearly $1 million playing out a 1965 season that no one wanted.
I mean, that was a very sad year, based on the fact that they knew we were leaving, going to Atlanta in 1966.
County Stadium's attendance plummeted to an all-time low of 555,584 fans in 1965.
When you passed County Stadium in the summertime, it was like a cemetery out there, a white elephant.
As the Braves' anticlimactic season came to a painful close, the majority of Milwaukee's baseball headlines came from the courtroom.
The first thing to do was to look legally at what kinds of remedies were available to the state of Wisconsin, and the state of Wisconsin ended up suing the Milwaukee Braves.
On August 6, 1965, Wisconsin Attorney General Bronson LaFollette filed antitrust lawsuits against the Braves and the National League.
Basically, what the state of Wisconsin was saying is, by taking this team away, you in effect have monopolized baseball and have restrained certain trades that could go on in relationship to baseball.
Never before had the nation's only federally protected legal monopoly faced an antitrust challenge on a state level.
There has been a body of law, starting with a 1922 case called Federal Baseball, which talked about whether or not the sport of baseball was subject to the Sherman antitrust law. And in that very earliest case, the Supreme Court said that baseball is a sport. It is not an interstate commerce. It is not in trade. It is purely a state affair, and therefore is not subject to the antitrust laws.
Rather than sue in federal court where baseball's well-established antitrust exemption would prevail, La Follette filed the action in state court under Wisconsin's antitrust law.
It was with the hope that they get a hometown decision.
They thought that they would have a better chance in the state courts under state law to get a favorable decision because of some of the emotion that was involved in the removal of the Braves to Atlanta.
In open court, state attorneys offered to drop the suit in exchange for a new franchise. But the owners protested, claiming that Wisconsin was holding the National League hostage until they promised an expansion team to Milwaukee.
It was a sort of a Bush League scuffle between two cities.
If victorious, the state of Wisconsin could seek injunctions in other states forbidding the Braves to play home games anywhere but within Milwaukee.
The Milwaukee people, they thought they had Atlanta nailed, and the Atlanta people thought they had Milwaukee nailed.
The ensuing trial in Judge Elmer Roller's Milwaukee courtroom had lifted the veil of innocence from the national pastime, exposing the sport's ugly visage of monopoly.
Roller was an excellent trial judge, but nevertheless, it came the love of Wisconsin and the love of baseball.
Ultimately, there was a decision that was rendered by Judge Roller in April of 1966, and Judge Roller said that the Milwaukee Braves had violated the Wisconsin antitrust laws.
Following a series of appeals, injunctions, rulings, and reversals that continued throughout the 1966 season and into the winter, the state of Wisconsin asked that the U.S. Supreme Court hear the case.
The ultimate decision was simple, and that is, you have a supremacy clause in the Constitution. That has priority over any state laws. Therefore, the state laws are not going to trump the federal laws.
Baseball's exemption from antitrust laws had been upheld, thus ending the legal brawl. Atlanta finally had its Braves.
When the Braves moved from Boston to Milwaukee, it was a cause for celebration in the streets. No one at that time thought that it would only last 13 years.
You see a piece of Americana that never existed before, is never going to exist again. No city is ever going to have a love affair with a team the way that Milwaukee did with the Braves.
The city embraced their ball club, and I sense that sometimes when you realize baseball's big business now, I think you lose some of that.
Back in 1953, Milwaukee could have never predicted the financial and emotional consequences of moving a professional sports franchise.
The owners start realizing they have this monopoly power where they can play cities off of each other. And the owner says to a city, oh, you want my team? I'll bring it there, but by the way, you've got to build me a fancy new stadium.
We still see it to this day with teams that are threatening their cities in all sports to get a better stadium or a bigger stadium or more revenue from their stadium. It's all about the stadium wars as much as an arms race as anything.
The Braves proved that your business could be extremely lucrative and that you didn't just have to be a sportsman anymore. You could become a billionaire by owning a sports team, and that hadn't always been the case.
That's the legacy of the Milwaukee Braves. It's because without the Milwaukee Braves, would the Dodgers still be in Brooklyn? Would they have ever moved to Los Angeles?
Atlanta baited the Braves with the same booster game plan Milwaukee had successfully formulated.
And what Lou Perini was able to do was find a community that was willing to accept his team, that had already built a stadium, hoping to lure Major League Baseball to its city.
No way did anybody expect that blueprint would ever be used against them, I don't think.
We're in a competitive environment, okay? Cities seek these valuable rights. Politicians maintain their jobs and elevate their jobs as a result of sports teams.
In the 1950s, in the four major sports, team sports,
There were only 18 cities in the United States represented, and almost all of them were in that northeast quadrant. Today, we're up to 43. And everybody's, fighting for those franchises.
It's amazing to me to this day to see cities underwrite some of the franchises, to see the people come out and spend the money they spend.
That changed the dynamic completely. Now, instead of this asset being part of your community, you were always at risk.
As municipalities fall victim to the high stakes of franchise relocation, team owners continue to enjoy their largest profits ever from corporate sponsorships, television revenue, and merchandising sales.
On a proportional basis, it's kind of interesting. About 10 years ago, gross revenue for the entire league was about $2.5 billion, and this year it'll probably be between 5.5 and 6 billion.
It's never been more profitable. The teams are making money, the players are making money, the ancillary people like television make money off of baseball.
It's all about money. It's professional sports. Professional means money.
While today's fans are continually reminded that America's pastime is a business after all, the game continues to endure, thanks to its timeless attraction.
A lot of things have changed in this game, but the way you play and the way you perform and the reasons you win all remain the same.
But Scour and Smash is backhanded by Matthews. He steps on third and it's all over but the tumult and the shouting. The new world's champions of baseball, the Miracle Men from Milwaukee.